I took the internship because I needed the credits and because I thought it would be a quiet summer. That's what I wanted. Something quiet. The job was a tiny nonprofit in a dying Louisiana town called Belmar, just south of Lake Maurepas. They handled wetland conservation efforts, mostly grant writing and seasonal cleanup crews. I'd be staying in a lone cabin and helping digitize land records, logging reports on water levels and wildlife sightings. But I should have asked more questions. Before we get into the story, I'm Devin, and this is Porch Lore. Please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Enjoy the story. This is Porch Lore. And I'm your host, Devin. This is the tale of the Marshlight. Belmar didn't show up on most maps. It wasn't quite a ghost town, but it sure felt like it was getting there. The roads were cracked and sun-faded. Gas station pumps were bagged, and the post office was boarded up. The only signs of life were a few sagging houses wrapped in moss and kudzu, and an overgrown Catholic cemetery that leaned toward the bayou like it was trying to slide back into the swamp. The nonprofit headquarters was a converted bait shop on stilts. The woman who ran it was in her 70s and barely looked up from her crossword when I arrived. She handed me a ring of keys, a box of old manila folders, and told me the cabin was on the far edge of the old preserve, but it hadn't been used in years. I drove there with my windows down, trying to pretend the sweat wasn't soaking through my shirt. The cabin was about 10 minutes from the main road, just a short bridge away from sinking into the marsh. Cypress trees loomed on all sides, their roots tangled in the mud, and the smell of sulfur and rot drifted on the heavy air. I remember standing on the porch, looking at the black water beneath the stilts and thinking that if the earth had a throat, this swamp was where it choked. The first night was uneventful, just heat and mosquitoes. I found an old box fan and plugged it in by the window, set up my laptop and fell asleep to the sound of the frogs and the distant pops from the marsh. It was the second night that things started to get strange. I woke up around 3 a.m. to a light outside the window. Not headlights from a car, and not a flashlight. It was blue, pale, and pulsing faintly, like a dying star just above the waterline. It floated. I sat up slowly and pressed my face to the window screen. The light hovered maybe 20 feet from the cabin, just beyond the edge of the trees, casting long, watery shadows that rippled across the roots and the grass. It drifted slightly left, then right, and then it vanished. I waited for something to follow. An engine, a voice, anything. There was nothing, just the humid air and the sudden absence of the frogs. In the morning, I told myself it must have been swamp gas, or a trick of light. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Maybe I had still been dreaming. I decided to look it up, and what I found blew my mind. Will-O-The-Wisp, marsh fire, Ignis fatuus, all old names for the same thing. Mysterious lights that appear over wetlands, and they're supposedly harmless. But I started locking the door at night after that. The next few days passed quietly enough. I digitized a dozen old surveys, took a kayak into the cypress groves, even spotted a few spoonbills and a nest of baby gators. But something felt wrong in the air. Not just the smell, although that got worse, like mildew and something like iron. No, it was quiet. Too quiet. I hadn't seen a single other person near the cabin since I'd arrived, and the nonprofit office had closed early every day. I chalked it up to heat or disinterest, until I found a folder labeled Marshlight. It was buried under a stack of soil surveys in the back of the office filing cabinet. The kind of thing you only find if you're bored or nosy, and I was both. The label was handwritten in red marker, faded, what looked like water damage on the corners. Inside were 8 printed reports, all local, all describing sightings going back 40 years. The first one was from 1976. A fisherman claiming a blue light followed his boat and capsized it. The next was in 1982. A woman who said her brother wandered into the swamp chasing a lantern and never came back. Others followed, years apart but eerily similar. Lights, disappearances, things seen in the water. The last was dated 1999. It simply read, "Subject claimed light spoke to her in dead brother's voice. Found wandering 6 miles from camp, with feet covered in blood. No sign of brother." None of these were in the digital files I was uploading. Someone had deliberately kept them separate. The next day, I asked the old woman at the nonprofit about it. She looked up from her crossword for a second, then muttered something about old stories and locals drinking too much. When I pressed, she snapped that I shouldn't go out at night, especially not near the standing pools. Then she dropped her pen and wouldn't look at me again. That night, I didn't sleep. The light came back. This time, closer. I watched it from the crack in the curtain, how it moved in slow serpentine loops across the water, bobbing like it was searching. And then it stopped, right at the edge of the porch. It hovered there, flickering faintly, like breath on glass. I felt cold all over, like the room had been vacuum sealed. Then I heard the tap, tap, tap on the screen door. Not knocking, more like scraping, like claws on metal mesh. I didn't go outside. I didn't even breathe. The next morning, I found the porch screen torn open, 3 long gashes low to the floor, and muddy prints, small ones, not human, not animal, like a cross between fingers and hooves, dragging inward. I drove straight to the parish records office. It was a cinder block building next to an abandoned car wash, and the AC barely worked. I found a part-time clerk who let me comb through old reports while he napped in the break room. And that's where I found the name, the Belmar Devil. Back in the early 1900s, locals believed in a swamp entity that lured people off paths with blue lanterns. They said it mimicked voices, stole faces, and wore the skin of people it lured. One folklorist from Tulane described it as a cryptid or demon with shape-shifting abilities, capable of assuming familiar forms to draw victims into the water. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a story to keep kids from staying out after dark. It was real. I rushed back to the cabin and packed everything. Laptop, clothes, everything but the records. I wasn't staying one more night. That's when I found the dead possum nailed to the door. Worse, the porch floor was soaked in dark, viscous water, and it was still wet. Whatever had done this had been there minutes before. I ran back in and locked myself in the cabin, and I called every number I had. No one answered. Not the nonprofit, not the police, not even my mom. That night, I heard it whispering my name through the walls. At first, I thought it was the wind or a radio, but it said my name again and again, like it was testing out how to say it. I pressed my back against the door and held a kitchen knife in my lap until sunrise. When morning came, I bolted for the car. But my car was gone. Not vandalized, not broken into, gone. The gravel all around it was disturbed, and tracks, hoofed in deep, led into the tree line as if something had dragged my car away. And that's when I lost it. I screamed until my throat gave out. I tried running to the road, but the heat and the fear made me dizzy, and I collapsed in a ditch full of reeds and biting flies. I had no choice. I had to go back. So I went back to the cabin and barricaded the door. I found the old propane stove, lit it, and sat by it like a campfire, knife still clutched. Then came the knock. This time, it was deliberate, rhythmic, knuckles on wood. I didn't move. Then a voice, my mother's voice, called out from outside. She said she'd come to bring me home, that she was sorry she hadn't answered my calls, and that she was worried about me. But I knew it wasn't her. She lived 3 states away. There was no way she could have gotten here that quickly. Then I heard another voice. Mine. It was me. Outside. Crying. Pleading to be let in. The voices circled the cabin all night. Laughing, begging, mimicking. I didn't open the door. Sometime before dawn, the stove flickered and died. The last thing I saw was the blue glow rising again through the floorboards, seeping up like fog. Then, everything went black. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later. They found me on the porch of the cabin, dehydrated, feverish, and repeating my own name over and over again. My fingernails were nearly torn off and my feet were blistered, but I was alive. They said the nonprofit shut down the day I went missing. The old woman who ran it, gone, vanished, and the property was seized by the state. How long have I been missing? When they questioned me, I said I'd had a heat stroke, a hallucination. I lied through my teeth, because the truth was worse. When I got my belongings back, I found that my red bandana, something I'd never taken off even in the shower, was missing. In its place was a muddy old scrap of flannel, not mine. I burned it. I moved back north, started going to therapy, and tried to forget. But last week, I saw a news article. A team of campers had gone missing near Lake Maurepas. The only clue was a picture one of them uploaded before disappearing. It showed a dim, marshy landscape and a small, flickering light hovering just above the water and bright blue. I'm Devin, and thanks for joining me, Porch Pals. For more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. And remember, there's always room for one more on the porch.